And let's let everybody in. 11 people.
Woohoo!
It's a big
On
one.
a sunny Wednesday.
I know. There's supposed to be a big storm here this afternoon. Big storm.
We have wind, but no storm.
We're supposed to have a big storm. Bonjour tout le monde. On va juste attendre une couple de secondes pour que tout le monde soit connecté. Couple people still stuck on the audio connection thing. Oh, we've got a few more people coming in.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Okay. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to the OMLTA Reading Network. Just to give you a little heads up, we are recording the main part of this this meeting this afternoon. We will not be recording when you're in breakout rooms having discussions. So if you do not want to be on camera, just make sure you turn your camera off. Otherwise, there's a chance you might be saved forever on the OMLTA YouTube channel. So welcome to our session this afternoon, Structuring Your Literacy Block. And Angeline and I are here to chat with you a little bit, but we do, again, like last time, want to have a little bit more discussion. So we will be sending you off into breakout rooms. And again, those will not be recorded. Before we go, though, we're going to start with our reconnaissance territoriale. La OPLV reconnaît que les activités de notre organisation et celles de nos membres se réalisent sur des terres des Autochtones. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler et vivre sur ces territoires. Nous remercions les peuples métis, inuits et des Premières Nations qui prennent soin de ces territoires depuis des temps immémoriaux et qui continuent de contribuer à la force de l'Ontario et des collectivités de la province. Nous voulons également reconnaître et faire l'honneur à la pérennité de la présence des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits qui vivent sur ces territoires depuis des temps immémoriaux. And we do just want to bring to your attention that the OMLTA is taking action towards reconciliation. And you may have seen Inspire at our most recent OMLTA Spring Conference. And we are still continuing that work with them and doing some great work there. And again, tonight, you do have a chance to win your own set of white books. So that link, you can use it right now, or we will put it in the chat a little bit later. You enter your email address and someone in our sessions will win a set of 10 white books. They'll just be shipped directly to your house and all you have to do is enter to win. So you can take a look at that link now, or we'll put it in the chat a little bit later. So just as a reminder to get us started, we talked a lot last week, if you were able to join us, about knowing our learners. And we talked about screening and we talked about what we would use that data for. And we got into a little bit around diagnostic and then some progress monitoring, and we had some great discussions. So just to bring us back to that mind frame, what do we know about our students as learners? And then what are the implications of that of that learning, of that evaluation, of that assessment in our teaching and in our learning that we do with our students. So keeping that in mind as we move through our discussion tonight, as well as that Scarborough's reading rope, right? All of those components of structured literacy that come together and that our students become more and more strategic as they weave together those strands. And we do spend a lot of time right now talking about that bottom part of the rope, the word identification, working with that phonemic awareness, working with decoding. But we also need to remember that top part of the rope. We need to remember, our background knowledge, our vocabulary, our language structures, our verbal reasoning. We need to have all of those pieces come together, which I almost think in French immersion, we need to put a little bit more emphasis on that language comprehension piece. So before we get into the big discussion today, we're going to send you off into some discussion groups. And we are going to ask, which components do you feel are critical to include in your literacy block? And how does assessment impact those components? So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. And we will see you in about 5 minutes.
From the breakout rooms.
They've got 50 seconds. Some of them are going to come back right away, and some of them are going to get their last couple words in there.
there were some loaded questions, I realized. So I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Room 4, room 5, and room 6 are still going. They must be having some good chats in there. They're not moving. 20 seconds and they'll have to come back.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, they must be going. Oh, okay. They're starting to make their way back. They got 10 seconds. Okay. Should all be heading back in now.
Excellent. Welcome back, everyone. I know that sometimes it's hard to leave those conversations at the, pros and cons of breakout rooms, but welcome back. So we did provide you with some pretty loaded, I say loaded in that there's a lot to unpack there. Questions, wondering if anyone wants to share some of the key messages or the key things that they talked about in their conversations.
I can start.
Thank you.
We just talked about how important it is for that background knowledge and the vocabulary to be built into French immersion, but it's also really, really challenging sorry, not just French immersion, but extended and core French, and to find those resources that are valuable and interesting for the students, but also at their grade level with the right vocabulary without overwhelming them. So we talked a little bit about how that's a really big thing. And then also how, like in Ontario with the new English curriculum, but then the French curriculum isn't different. And that real big disconnect right now I'm finding with teachers and what the messaging is from like all our learning, and we know all these things, but then how to make that understood to teachers, basically, like why are we not doing JBPS, but we're doing decodables, and how are we assessing these things? And there's just lots of things happening, I think, on the French side. Lots of our teaching has already been around, I think, like sounds and building that vocabulary, but then how to kind of just make that all fit was a big thing that we discussed.
Thank you very much for sharing. And it's interesting because you brought up so many things just in that short period of time. I do know that actually recently at the conference, Jordan and I had the opportunity to sort of unpack where do we see structured literacy connected to our FSL curriculum. And it is there. There are some examples that we know are not examples we want to, like within the EGs, I want to say, within the curriculum. Some of those are more connected to 3 queuing system, but there are some great pieces in there. It's just unpacking that and making those connections to what we know about structured literacy. I would say it's been really interesting just to hear from people about where they were using GB+ and DRA and how they're shifting their understanding and their practice, which has been really great. Is there anyone else that would like to share their conversations?
Yes, this is Lisa. We talked for the majority of the 5 minutes about read alouds, and in particular, how to make it interactive and challenging for the kids. How do they get to participate in the read aloud with each other and not just answering the teacher's questions one at a time? And maybe not changing books every day. Could we be intentional on one book for at least 3 days?
And there
for different purposes each day.
I'm so sorry about that, Lisa. My apologies. So there is a lot of research about the impact of repeated reading. And I would say, especially for additional language learners, that repeated learning is essential to building that background knowledge vocabulary. And even within there, connecting the informational text to the narrative about something connected to their social studies or science curriculum. Thank you. And then we'll take Janelle and Tanya, and then I think we'll move on if that's okay.
Yeah, just in terms of the, what's critical for our literacy blocks, when we look at Scarbo's reading rope, we see the different, components. So they have the background knowledge, vocabulary, the language structure. That's your, and the verbal reasoning and literacy knowledge along with the word recognition. So we're teaching the sounds, that students can hear the sounds and identify what, letters make those sounds to make that letter sound correspondence. And then also, so that they can read the words, but then we also want them to understand the words. So that's where, building their oral vocabulary is so important in French immersion, especially because we know that a lot of students, it's not their first language. So they don't have that exposure to the vocabulary outside the classroom. So through our read alouds, we can really build their language and build their language. And one shift that I made actually today in my teaching, because I read Stephanie Stoller's came out with this, how to structure your read alouds. And she actually, what I've been doing is I've been doing those repeated readings, but I'm teaching the vocabulary as we come to them in the book. But she actually suggests teaching, taking whatever passage of the book you're going to read now and teaching the words at the, before you start the lesson, so that you can model that fluent reading, so that you're not stopping to explain the word while you're reading the text, but you've already taught that vocabulary before. And then you get the kids, and then the kids are going to hear that word and they're going to make sense of what what you're reading to them for that oral comprehension. And then we know as students build their vocabulary, when they're going to go read themselves, when they are able to decode those words and then pick those words, off the page, they're going to be able to make sense of what they're reading in that language comprehension. And that's why, really the components, when you look at, reading sounds, spelling sounds, reading words, blending sounds, spelling words are so important for us to be practicing and following a scope and sequence that allows us to go back and practice the skills that have been introduced.
Thank you very much, Janelle. And you're just reminding me about how early on the strands of the rope are not connected on purpose. That's intentional, because we can have really rich read alouds that we use for repeated reading to build that vocabulary. And the one, I know that we have been working in the realm of sounds and pronunciation, those types of things in French immersion for a long time. That one thing is that explicit and systematic and following a scope and sequence is definitely something I think that is a key learning area amongst there. Tanya.
I was just thinking about how it's important to have that whole group, small group, and that independent, that whole group, and even focusing on whether it's language comprehension, like especially in French immersion, that those targeted listening strategies, right? Listening to understand and pulling that in with the whole group, whether it's the phonics or the language comprehension, the vocabulary, or the daily writing, and then going to that small group support, and from there giving the independent. So having the balance of all three.
And that small group, I say that second question about how does assessment impact these components, I think, yes, it guides our whole group, but it also is critical to our small group. Jordan, if we want to move, thank you. So one of the ideas that I know we're sharing as a board is really based around, this is actually based around UFly within our context. But looking at 30 minutes now, I know we've had a lot of discussion around the order of these 30 minutes. So 30 minutes of that explicit, systematic, and sequential word recognition work, 30 minutes of small group instruction based on word recognition or language comprehension, and 30 minutes where it's really connecting to that rich comprehension, production, interaction, oral language, developing the vocabulary, background knowledge, verbal reasoning, and language structures. Now, yes, you can flip those. It's not a matter of they need to stay in that order, but they can also build on one another. Because they're in this order, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't one day work on the comprehension within that space. And the other thing is, if you're in a kindergarten classroom, for example, I sure hope it doesn't look like 30, 30, 30. I hope that explicit systematic is in and amongst 7 to 15 minutes, because full group instruction, we really don't want to have students, in that whole group much longer than that, just developmentally appropriate. And same as that last 7 to 15 minutes. Small group in kindergarten happens throughout the day. And I had a great conversation with someone today, actually, in and around core French. So what would that look like in a core French classroom? And also looking at this is what happens very early on as students grow into junior and intermediate. Some of the balance of it shifts a little bit. So this is actually Sonograph. So we're working with UFly to develop a French adaptation of UFly. It is not a translation, but within there, looking at that 30 minutes. So the phonemic awareness, the visual exercise, auditory exercise, blending, and then you introduce the new concept. I've actually seen this in action, and I know that it says 30 minutes, but the person actually took 17 minutes, and that was with people getting up, students getting up and going to their desks to do the writing part. So really knowing that that's just a piece, and especially in FI, that oral language comprehension is another piece. And day 2, you're working with the new concept, doing some word work, irregular words, and looking at connected text. And again, you'll note that there's a note there about kindergarten. You're looking at 15 minutes maximum. I know I taught kindergarten for a long time. I had students that could sit still much longer than that, but that just for their attention span and for their developmental levels, that's really what we want to strive for. So if we're talking about that 30 minutes, so really using the assessment that we have and what we know about our learners, how can we provide some small group instruction with centers and actually one-on-one or small group instruction based on that word recognition and language comprehension? So we're going to delve into some more breakout rooms, Jordan. So I'd like you to take a moment within your breakout groups to talk about which resources, strategies do you find most helpful to support small group instruction / centers, because you know, while you're with the students, you need the other students to be really diving into some meaningful practice around language comprehension and or word recognition. So Jordan's going to put you in breakout rooms. Thank you, Jordan.
Hopefully my internet lasts the next.
Oh, through the storm.
Yeah. It's not
That would be
start at 5, but I don't know. It's not looking good.
That would be great. We'll let people know if you go just to. Would it stay with Amy though? I wondered.
Because I'm a host, it may.
Because you're co-host.
I hope so. We're just
We'll
going to
find
wait for everyone to get back. I see some are already returning.
We got 5 seconds left.
And the weight room person's back in.
Okay. Everybody's back.
Oh, and Lisa's here. I saw Lisa again. Welcome back, everyone. So talking about those resources and strategies for small group instruction and those centers. So wondering what, if anyone has anything they'd like to share from their conversation. I know I put everyone on the spot when we do that, but just know when you go to a breakout room, it's going to be the first thing we ask you when you come back, because I don't love to hear myself talk.
I was talking in a breakout room about word recognition because I'm a core French teacher, and I teach in an area where there's families who struggle. So I limit my vocabulary to usually around 5 words, and then I use a variety of verbs so I can get kids to practice oral communication while I'm teaching the sounds, like OI is wa, and the bossy O directs how the I is pronounced. And I do with like UI and stuff. So we will get the oral component, some word recognition, because the 5 words, we get the 5 words. And then we use words that, some of the words I try to pick that as close to the English so that they would learn to read in English while they learn to recognize that this word is seen in French, but it's pronounced differently. Because I have a lot of kids who do not know how to read English as well. So that is a big challenge for me.
It's really great to have that core French perspective here today. So thank you very much for that. It's interesting because I had a conversation with someone about that today and how you know, teaching those grapheme phoneme connections in grade 4 core French is a great, you know, as sort of a quick, even a warm-up activity, and then some of those really useful words that show up a lot in print, it could be really helpful. And as you mentioned, that oral language is key. And there are so many cognates and kind of maximizing on students' background knowledge with their first language or their home language to really build that out. Thank you for sharing. So some of the things that, some examples of things that for small group instruction, in particular, if we're talking about language comprehension. So again, as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of what happens in kindergarten and that play-based learning. And I feel that play-based learning should really, I've had conversations with secondary educators, and they've talked about that, you know, play-based learning, what is that? But then in conversation, they realize they're actually doing that in many cases that they just don't understand. Like when we get our hands on and into things, that helps develop that language comprehension. eDialo has some great supports. There's a picture of a text there. So looking at those mentor texts and how can we use small group, talking about first, next, then, maybe looking at building richer sentences in response using because, but, so en français. Also looking at, sequencing activities just to develop that further comprehension. I linked a resource there from Théâtre à l'école. So looking at that oral language development, I really find that resource very friendly and helpful. And then when we talk about word recognition, some of the things we might do with those small group decodable texts. So this is from 7 Mighty Moves. It's just a little routine, not a little routine, but it's a routine that you'll follow. Just looking at how you might use those decodable texts. I find it's very easy to fall into old practice with new resources. And I really want to caution people around doing that. So the goal of a decodable text is to get them to move them beyond that. So not really using those decodable texts for things like rich language, because there is language in there, but that's where those mentor texts come into play. Some other, that's there twice, my apologies. So some other things that are great for that word recognition are looking at word work match. So how might you use the phonemes and graphemes that you've worked on to date to tap it, map it, graph it. There's just a sample of what that could look like there. We have chips and wands within our school board where we're using that to blend those sounds together. And of course, the gamification that is available. So this is just a sample there with lancer et lire. Some other examples that you might find there are some video examples within the Building Competent and Engaged Readers in French Immersion document. And you'll see here, there's just each large component has why learning is important, connections to the CFR, connections with the FSL curriculum, and then the learning goals. So the one thing that I want to say though is this is a snapshot of where we were at that time. So when you hear someone schwa, so that adding saying b instead of b, that is where we were in our learning at that time. If we were to redo it, it would be different. So just want to highlight that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about that 30 minutes where we're working on that language comprehension. So the production, interaction, oral language, written language, really to look at the developing vocabulary and that knowledge base. And so I know in our board, we really talk about, this is where in French immersion, you're wanting to pull in the science and social studies. In core French, you might want to talk about what's happening within the school community or connect to the science and social studies that they're covering within their homeroom. And this is where for us, especially across Ontario, we're very fortunate that a lot of our learning in FSL has been around the CEFR. So that is for me, the assessment tool that we use to measure comprehension at this time is that CEFR, and knowing that each learner enters at a different point with different competencies and how can we build them and grow them from there. So one thing I know that I have found really meaningful in my own learning journey is talking about backwards design. So what is it we want students to know and be able to do, and how are we going to get them there? I know it's really, sometimes we can find some things that are easy to use, but really and truly we want to look at our FSL curriculum at present, science, social studies, depending on what you cover in French, how you want to, and then looking at the CFR, those pieces, using those to guide our instruction and how we want to get students to that point. And then how will we know that they have? So what assessment are we going to implement to find out how we know that they have? One really valuable tool when we're talking about that backwards design is the action-oriented approach. So what task might we be building towards to have students be able to show what they know and are able to do at the end of this learning journey? So whether it's a repeated reading, or I like to call them learning cycles, because to me, you know, you're working towards that task. And it could look, again, it very much depends on your context, but it could be that you're working towards it over 2 weeks and you're really getting to that goal where students are acting as those social agents and meeting a goal. And this is just a sample of one thing that we worked on within our school board and within our region, actually. So we had the opportunity through our regional funding to work on a grade 5 example. Here is an earlier example, but day 1, you might just, the introduction, the author, the big idea, then looking at day 2, really explicitly getting into that vocabulary. And it doesn't mean you're not pre-teaching the vocabulary prior to day 1, but that you're getting into it a little bit more in depth. Day 3, connecting with science. Day 4, looking at those emotions and getting deeper into those words. And then day 5, really encouraging students to create and discuss their own inventions. And you can see how this particular book could be dragged out even further. I could see how you could do so much more within there. So thinking of what we've talked about so far, we're going to send you off into breakout groups again. And I want you to think about which shifts are you considering, or have you maybe recently making to your literacy block moving forward? And what questions do you still have? And know that when you come back, I will ask you to share. How many breakouts were there, Jordan?
6. So some groups of 3, some groups of 4.
Okay.
So 1, 2, 3. 3 groups of 4 people, and then 3 groups of 3 people. Except that you and Amy didn't go, so. Oh, must be good conversation. Nobody's coming back. Welcome back. It must have been some good discussions on this one, because usually when I hit the closed breakout rooms, a few people pop back right away and nobody came back to the last 10 seconds this time. Maybe you're all not wanting to share with Angeline. So
they decided to stay. I know, it's because I'm so intimidating. I know.
Does anyone have anything that they want to share? What shifts are you considering making to your literacy block moving forward? What questions do you still have? Stacy S. raised a hand.
We were just talking about our next journey is trying to build out tech sets based on science and social studies or important events, but just having that set of text based on a similar topic, and then building out read aloud based on key vocabulary that supports those text sets. It's sort of what we're working on within our school building.
Interesting. I had that conversation with someone the other day, because we had worked on last year. One of the things we did as a school board was pulled the key vocabulary out of the science and social studies curriculum documents that, you know, every student in grade 2, you're hoping they have exposure to, not necessarily can they read independently, but are exposed to these words and hopefully would know those words and just across the curriculum. So that sounds like an exciting project that you're working on in your school.
Stacy, you should mention also about LibBib. I thought that was really good idea.
Oh, okay. There's an app. We were just, I have a co-op student. We were looking at different projects, and I thought it would be nice to have a visual. You kind of get to the point where you have a lot of books, and depending on your organizational system, you might forget that you have certain topics or already within your access. So LIBIB, LIBIB, is like an online way to catalog, and you can sort and you can build a list based on a collection. And so off of Amazon, I bought a scanner. So on the ISBN number, you scan it, and then it saves it in your collection. The image of the book pops up, all the key information pops up. And it's just a good kind of visual way of cataloging the books you already have access to.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that, Stacy. If you wanted, you could drop that in the chat, just what I
Sure.
used out, but thank you. Anything else that anyone wants to share about their shifts or questions they might still have?
I wanted to just bring up a question that our group was discussing. I was speaking from a grade 8 French immersion standpoint, and noticing that a lot of these, practices that are coming out, or new, new ideas, are always geared towards the primary immersion. So we were just wondering, how do centers, or how do these small group learning blocks look in a junior intermediate classroom, when sometimes you don't even have a lot of time with them? You only have like half a day with them, because I only teach, let's say my class, I teach 2 classes half a day each, and sometimes I only have them for 2 periods, and I have to get in science, history, geography, art, right? So that's what we had, like the questions we had.
Well, and hence for you, that integration and that is really critical, right? Because your schedule is so tight. So looking at your where that phonics piece is in grade 1, that's where your morphology, your sentence structure, your language structures, that's where that would fit in, and connected to reading and writing, because we want to keep the momentum, the learning going. And then even just building in that really rich background and experience. But you may have students also, because of the shift in practice, that have maybe have some gaps in their learning when it comes to phoneme, grapheme connection. So, knowing that there is tools available to support what that looks like is valuable. But you're right that in intermediate, junior intermediate, it does look different. That backward design is really, really valuable. I know one of the lesson plans that we did was with Nibia Swaf, was a junior example, but still using that backwards design to develop into late writing.
I will say that morphology piece too has been really fun for us to be doing in our board with our junior and intermediates, breaking down words and trying to figure out why they sound the way they do and where the parts of the word come from. It's been really interesting for our intermediate students. Janelle, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to share, to add to I know that that's been a big question about many junior and intermediate teachers that I work with as well, as, how do we support our students in junior and intermediate, especially when we notice those gaps in their early foundational skills, because, they didn't receive that explicit instruction maybe in the earlier grades, because we all know that most of us taught to a balanced literacy program if we turn back the clock a few years. And I know that I've said this before, I think last week, but also we were talking about this in my group. The Calgary board has released some stuff on their Google Drive for literacy practice in the junior and intermediate grades, and that might be a resource for a grade 8 teacher to look at for how to support the intermediate students in literacy. And also I know that I saw this, and I know that Twitter's not, Twitter actually ends up being a really good professional dialogue amongst colleagues. And I saw someone post, I'm adapting UFly in, for my high school students, because I noticed that these kids need that explicit instruction, and that, finding ways to make it more engaging at that level, because the reality is these kids need those skills, because we don't want them, if we're identifying that there's gaps in learning, we have to be teaching to it, even if we're coming down in the grade levels of it.
Thank you. Janelle.
Okay, so I think we'll move on a little bit. We are looking for your feedback. So we do have one more webinar together next week, and then a final wrap up with a great guest host the week after. But we are looking for some feedback from you. We need it to provide feedback to the ministry about how we're doing what we're doing, but also helps us to plan for future sessions. So if you can take a moment to give us a little bit of feedback about this session and other sessions you've attended. And we do have a prize this evening, as well as being entered into the draw for the white book. You can win a prize just for being here tonight. So Amy, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen if it'll let me so that we can do the wheel of names. And can you just confirm that it looks okay? Because I've got.
I can't see it yet, but there it is. There we are.
All right. All right, so Nancy is our lucky winner. Nancy, if you will put an email address in the chat that you can email omlta.omlta.org, and then we'll get that prize shared out to you. I'll stop sharing my screen to let you go back to the slide deck there.
Okay, Emma, we good? Just as a reminder, we do have quite a few resources that are going up on the omlta.org website. These are some of the things that we put together last year, some one-page wonders. So you can take a look at any of those at any point. There are some great recorded webinars from those available through those QR codes or through the OMLTA YouTube channel, as well as any of the recordings from this year's Reading Network. They'll all be posted there. So if you did miss out on last week's Knowing Your Learner and you want to take another look, you can go ahead and do that there. And our next session, so next week, Angeline and I are back again for responsive literacy instruction. And then we've got one final session for this school year, Lecture à voix haute, une pratique gagnante with Chantal Lafontaine, who will be joining us. So what I'm going to do now is turn off the recording and we'll stick around and chat if anyone wants to stay and chat with us. And otherwise, I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.